They didn't just burn monasteries. What came after the flames is the part history tried to bury. We grow up picturing longships and axes, thunder on the water, monasteries falling like wheat before the scythe. Yet when the shouting faded and the smoke drifted out to sea, a different chapter began, one written on the bodies of women who had sworn their lives to God. You think you know Viking violence? The famous tales go quiet right where the worst truth starts. What did the records skip, and why did the soil remember more than the scribes? Excavations speak where parchment stutters. Iron cuffs sized for slender wrists. Small ankle rings that would never fit a grown warrior. Foundations of structures meant not to store grain, but to store people. What if the treasure wasn't gold at all? The market for human beings did not rise by accident. It rode the same rivers as fur and amber, and it paid better than relics. A woman vowed to Christ could be priced like livestock, her value calculated by age, health, and the damage done during the raid. Who taught the world to measure a soul in silver? Some sites show ritual layers, burn ash, broken offerings, female bones arranged with chilling deliberation. Was this worship, or warning? In several boat burials, women lie with marks on the neck, with traces of plants in their teeth, herbs that blur fear into submission. Visions, yes, but not of heaven. By the time armies wintered inland, refuse heaps told stories the chronicles omitted. Tiny skulls. Deliberate fractures. Not stillbirth, not accident, decision. In that cold arithmetic, if the mother is property, so is the child, if it cannot serve, it cannot stay. What kind of law makes grief into policy? Codes from the north laid out ownership like a right, declare the claim before witnesses, erase her will, bless the offspring as legitimate. Not a marriage, an instrument. The language was legal. The reality was a cage. When a law blesses a bruise, does it sanctify it, or simply hide it? Archaeology keeps returning to the same refrain, silence in the manuscripts, evidence in the ground. Monastic sites turn up light on women's remains and heavy on indications of transport, anchors, wear polished rings, packing floors for living cargo. Ports evolved from raiding hubs into processing stations. Not holding pens, warehouses. Not rescues, shipments. The routes run north to cold harbors, east along big rivers toward cities whose markets hungered for fair skin and foreign sanctity. Runes carved like receipts. Ledgers without ink, kept in stone and bone. The system worked because it was a system. When resistance came, the punishment turned from swift to spectacular. Pits too narrow to lie down, too shallow to stand, lined with rough stones or filled with freezing water. A sentence designed not merely to kill but to display. Other captives were made to watch. Obedience, the lesson, despair, the method. Peace, when it arrived under new kings, did not end the trade, it optimized it. The same roads that carried raiders carried caravans. Treaties named categories and prices. Youth commanded a premium. Expectant mothers were discounted, children often valued near worthless. Commerce made cruelty efficient. On battlefields where coalitions finally broke Norse power, the baggage trains revealed collapsible pens, chain assemblies for different sizes, frames that went up and down with the army's camp. This was not spoils of war improvisation, it was supply chain. Archaeological surveys across Norse towns repeat the pattern, every major settlement with holding structures, every harbor with intake capacity. The infrastructure hides in plain stone, rings, thresholds, bolts, mundane hardware that once organized nightmares. When a dynasty fell and a kingdom changed hands, the network did not vanish, it was rebranded. Contract terms shifted. Word softened. Chains stayed. Indenture replaced slavery, the way weathered replaces broken. The ledgers kept humming. In graves dated to the same seasons as defeats, mass female burials surface, orderly, not chaotic. The methods replicate the violence once inflicted outward, blunt force, ligature marks, traces of toxins. Fathers become executioners, abbots become judges, husbands become hands that silence what they cannot carry forward. What do you do with witnesses when the victors are coming? A skull turns up with a short carving, someone's cold justification. A girl barely in her teens, carried across seas as a child, claimed by a household that one day decided she must not be found alive. They buried the evidence by burying the living. Law codifies the unthinkable, public claim over a vowed woman, her resistance void, her consent irrelevant. If she takes her life, her kin pay damages, because a human being was booked as inventory. The price of a life is listed like barley. When a dynasty fell and a kingdom changed hands, the network did not vanish, it was rebranded. Contract terms shifted. Word softened. Chains stayed. Indenture replaced slavery, the way weathered replaces broken. The ledgers kept humming. In graves dated to the same seasons as defeats, mass female burials surface, orderly, not chaotic. The methods replicate the violence once inflicted outward, blunt force, ligature marks, traces of toxins. Fathers become executioners, abbots become judges, husbands become hands that silence what they cannot carry forward. What do you do with witnesses when the victors are coming? A skull turns up with a short carving, someone's cold justification. A girl barely in her teens, carried across seas as a child, claimed by a household that one day decided she must not be found alive. They buried the evidence by burying the living. While rulers tax human cargo, ships adapt to human weight, vent shafts for breathing bodies, larger water stores, reinforced hulls tuned not for plunder but for transport. One vessel burns, all souls aboard go with it. The sea keeps its own records. And yet resistance breathes between lines. Bent shackles near river crossings. Rosary fragments pressed into mud where someone fell, or threw them aside rather than let them be counted. A note in a foreign chronicle that names a woman who unlearned her chains and learned fire. She raids raiders, breaks camps, tears open markets, frees captives by night. Ghost or legend, the pattern she started leaves scorched footprints. Conquest takes on new banners and languages, but the practice echoes. Lands are granted, and with them, all chattels, a list that coolly puts women beside animals and grain. Castle substructures include windowless rooms with iron doors. Infant mortality approaches totality not by disease alone but by policy. Erase the evidence to erase the scandal. When shame threatens power, which one is allowed to live? Victories get called purification. Forced unions become holy. Title deeds are laundered through bodies. Some women choose death rather than subsumption, cloisters swell with those seeking safety, despair rises with the numbers. The state calls suicide a crime against property, the church invents a new kind of sanctity to explain the same act. Genetic and isotopic studies sketch out the routes long after the ships rot. Maternal lines from the Isles thread into Scandinavian soil, the pattern tracks not with migration but with coercion. Populations bear the map in their blood. An empire of surnames that began with a scream. In one northern city, beneath medieval debris, a structure of carved stone cells appears, each with a ring set into the wall. The polish says bodies rubbed those rings, not tools. Occupation spans decades, pregnancies appear repeatedly, discards happen when the body can no longer produce. This is not prison, it is production. Cathedral registers nearby list baptisms titled foundlings. Payments go out on sanctuary services. Money flows from holy coffers to profane operators. The partnership hides behind a veil of paperwork. Is a blessing anything more than a receipt when money changes hands? The pattern repeats across settlements. Holding, breeding, transferring, baptizing, selling, erasing. Expand. Refine. Profit. Repeat. Another site, long studied for warrior graves, reveals deeper phases, burials stacked across half a century. Bones trace mercury compounds, slow poison, madness before death. Silence a testimony not by cutting the tongue, but by breaking the mind that wields it. If a woman appears mad, her word weighs nothing. If her mind is unmade, the record absolves itself. Children lie with their mothers, family lines stopped like a snuffed candle. The chosen victims served as translators and overseers, women who might identify routes, faces, and names. Those who could speak the truth became the first to vanish. Even the inscriptions betray the killer's need to be right. Better this way, carved beside the skull of a child vowed to heaven. Justification is a thin blanket in a cold room, but someone still reaches for it. And still, there were acts of defiance. Shackles broken on river stones. Secret baptisms outside registers. Hidden graves with crosses carved small, quick, crooked, signals to whoever might come after that someone resisted. When the records fell silent, the ground learned to speak. If you want the voices pulled from peat and bone to keep talking, follow us. Every week we surface evidence the chronicles set aside. Like this, the market networks that outlasted the raiders, inherited by new powers with new titles. The word slave becomes serf, the chain becomes an oath, the seller becomes a steward. The system survives by changing clothes. And you, where are you watching from? Type your city. History blooms in specific places, not abstractions. The routes that started in cold fjords pass through your backyard in the blood of your neighbors, in the stones of your churches, in the surnames on your street. We do not repeat this to dwell in horror but to anchor the truth. Laws that mask harm, markets that price bodies, rituals that call cruelty sacred, these are ancient, yet they have modern reflections. Knowing the pattern is how we break the pattern. Like this video if you believe these silenced lives deserve witness. Subscribe to Winds of Thought so we can keep funding fieldwork, translation, and the patient work of naming the unnamed. If we stop telling it, who will?